My father always said it in the same calm, unhurried voice. You never finish anything. Not loudly, not angrily. He never needed to raise his voice. That was part of the power of it. He said it the way doctors say a diagnosis, like the conclusion had already been reached years ago, and every conversation afterward was just a formality. Something he repeated not to hurt me, but to remind me of what he believed was already proven. It usually came after small things. Dropped classes. Jobs I left because they turned toxic. Projects I abandoned when they stopped making sense or started eating me alive. He never asked why. He never cared about reasons. To him, reasons were excuses people used when they lacked discipline. I learned early that explaining myself only made things worse. Every sentence I said became another exhibit in his invisible courtroom. Every attempt to justify myself turned into proof that I was unstable, unreliable, incapable of commitment. So I stopped explaining. We lived together, but we never really talked. We existed in the same space like two people sharing a waiting room. Polite, cold, careful. Every interaction felt like a test I didn't know I was taking until I failed it. The house was always part of the conversation, even when it wasn't mentioned. Old walls, old furniture, old expectations. It was technically ours, registered in both our names, but it never felt like mine. I was always a guest in a place that was supposed to be home. When I finally said I was leaving, he didn't ask where I was going. That should have been the first warning sign, but at the time, it just felt normal. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look worried. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, like a man watching a familiar scene repeat itself. Don't come back later saying no one warned you. That was it. No, be careful. No, call me when you arrive. No, how long will you be gone? Just certainty. In his mind, he already knew how this would end. Me coming back embarrassed, defeated, quiet, apologetic. Another unfinished attempt filed away in his mental archive of my failures. He was convinced I was running away. From him, from the house, from responsibility. That's how he framed it later when he talked to other people. I know that now. At the time, I just stood there, holding my backpack, realizing something cold and sharp in my chest. He had already given up on the version of me that might surprise him. What hurt wasn't the words themselves. It was the complete absence of curiosity. He didn't want to know who I was becoming. He only wanted to be right about who I had been. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't slam the door or raise my voice or throw dramatic lines at him. I had learned that drama only fed his sense of superiority. Instead, I nodded. And that scared him a little, even if he didn't show it. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting the way he expected. I wasn't begging him to believe in me. I wasn't promising to do better. I wasn't asking for approval. I was done trying to convince someone who had already decided I was temporary. What he didn't know, what he didn't want to know, was that I wasn't leaving impulsively. I wasn't chasing some vague dream. I wasn't disappearing because I couldn't handle life. I was choosing something that required more endurance, discipline, and commitment than anything I had ever done before. And for the first time in my life, I made that choice without explaining it to anyone, not even him. I signed the contract quietly. No speeches, no dramatic moments, no one shaking my hand and telling me how proud they were. Just a small office with bad lighting, a pen that scratched the paper, and a woman across the desk who didn't care about my past, my family, or my reasons. She only looked at me once and asked, "You sure?" I nodded. That was it. No one called my father. No one asked for his permission. No one required an explanation about why a girl like me, unfinished, as he liked to say, would choose something that demanded discipline, obedience, and the ability to endure discomfort without applause. I liked that. The silence felt earned. I packed my backpack that night. Not a suitcase, a backpack. Practical, light, no space for nostalgia. I left most of my things exactly where they were. Clothes in the closet, books on the shelf, cups in the kitchen cabinet. It looked like I was going to the store, not leaving my life behind. Maybe that was part of why he didn't take it seriously. He was in his room when I zipped the backpack. I waited for a sound. Footsteps. A door opening. A cough. Anything. Nothing. I stood by the front door longer than I want to admit. Keys in my hand, listening to the house breathe. Pipes ticking. The fridge humming. Familiar noises that suddenly felt chujimi, like they belonged to someone else's memory. I considered knocking. Just once. Not to explain. Not to ask permission. Just to see if he would look at me differently. But I already knew the answer. So I didn't. I opened the door and stepped outside. No goodbye. No come back safe. No last warning this time. The air outside felt sharper, colder. I remember thinking that it felt honest, like the world wasn't pretending to be softer than it was. On the way to the station, my phone buzzed once. A message from him. Just 3 words. "You'll regret this." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because it hurt, I was used to that, but because of how predictable it was. Even now, he wasn't asking, "Where are you going?" or "When will you be back?" He wasn't worried about my safety. He wasn't curious. He was invested in my future failure. I didn't reply. I turned my phone off. That was the moment, looking back, when something shifted inside me. Not anger, not rebellion, detachment. People talk about leaving like it's an explosion, like doors slam and voices break and tears fall in cinematic ways. For me, it was quieter, more surgical. I wasn't running. I was removing myself from a narrative where I had already been written as a disappointment. At the intake point, they took my phone, my documents. My name became a line on a list. My past became irrelevant. No one there knew that my father believed I couldn't finish anything. No one cared that he thought I'd come crawling back. They didn't ask what I was escaping. They asked what I could endure. That difference mattered more than I realized at the time. That night, lying on a narrow bed in a room full of strangers, I stared at the ceiling and waited for regret to hit me. It didn't. What came instead was fear, sharp, real, physical. Fear of pain, fear of failure, fear of being exposed as exactly what my father thought I was. But underneath the fear, there was something else. Relief. Because for the first time, my life wasn't being measured by someone else's disappointment. I fell asleep knowing one thing for sure. Even if I failed here, even if I broke, quit, or came back, it would be my failure, not the one he had been predicting for years. And that made all the difference. Service didn't start with heroism. It didn't start with speeches, flags, or anyone telling us we were special. It started with silence. The first thing they taught us wasn't how to fight or how to follow orders. It was how to shut up. Not just externally, internally. How to stop narrating your own suffering. How to stop waiting for validation. How to stop checking whether someone was watching. The silence was everywhere. In the early mornings, in the long corridors, in the way instructions were given without explanation and expected to be followed without commentary. No one asked who my father was. No one asked what I had studied before. No one cared what kind of daughter I had been. For the first time, my past meant nothing. Training lasted 6 months. 6 months of routine so repetitive it stripped time of meaning. Wake up, line up, move, repeat. Eat quickly, sleep lightly. Wake up again before your body was ready. People broke quietly. Some cried in bathrooms, some faked injuries. Some became angry, loud, desperate to prove something. They were noticed immediately, not in a good way. I learned fast that endurance wasn't loud. It was invisible. I focused on small things, folding my uniform perfectly, breathing evenly when my muscles burned, counting steps, memorizing patterns, staying present without spiraling. Every day I expected someone to tell me I didn't belong there. Every day, no one did. There were moments when my father's voice came back to me, uninvited. "You never finish anything." It showed up when my hands shook from exhaustion, when I couldn't feel my feet anymore, when the thought of quitting crept in like a reasonable suggestion. I didn't argue with that voice. I let it speak. And then I kept going anyway. That was the strangest part. I wasn't trying to prove him wrong. I wasn't imagining his face when I succeeded. I wasn't motivated by revenge or pride. I was motivated by something quieter. Stubbornness, maybe, or dignity, or the simple refusal to be reduced to someone else's expectations. Halfway through training, something shifted. Not dramatically. No single moment where I suddenly felt strong or confident. It was more like realizing that I wasn't counting the days anymore. Pain became information instead of an emergency. Fear became background noise instead of a command. Orders stopped feeling personal. I started to trust myself in ways I never had before, not emotionally, practically. I learned that I could function while tired, while scared, while unsure. I learned that discomfort didn't mean danger, and failure didn't mean identity. No one applauded that. No one needed to. At night, when we finally had a few minutes to ourselves, some people wrote letters. Long ones. Emotional ones. I watched them fold pages carefully, like they were preserving proof that someone remembered who they used to be. I didn't write. Not because I didn't miss anything, but because I didn't know how to explain who I was becoming. What would I say to my father? "I'm fine" would be a lie. "I'm struggling" would be ammunition. "I'm changing" would sound like another excuse. So I stayed silent. And in that silence, I grew. By the end of the 6 months, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't the weakest one there. I wasn't the strongest either. But I was consistent. I showed up. I followed through. I finished. No one made a speech about it. No certificate with my name on it changed how the world saw me. But inside, something locked into place. For the first time in my life, I knew, not hoped, not wished, not imagined, that I could endure things without needing anyone's permission or belief. And somewhere far away, in a quiet house that still smelled like old furniture and certainty, my father was telling himself a story where I had already disappeared. He had no idea that silence wasn't absence. It was preparation. People think silence is empty. It isn't. Silence is full of decisions. After training ended and real service began, time stopped behaving normally. Days blurred into each other, then suddenly fractured into sharp moments you remembered forever. Locations changed without warning. Schedules shifted overnight. There were stretches when we slept in fragments and stretches when sleep felt unreal, like something borrowed from another life. That was when the question of letters came up. "You should write home," someone said one evening, sitting on the edge of a bunk. "They worry." I nodded. It was easier than explaining. I did write, technically. Sometimes one sentence, sometimes two. "I'm alive. I'm fine. Don't worry." I never wrote where I was. I couldn't. I never wrote what I did. I wasn't allowed. And I never wrote how I felt, because that part didn't fit into words anymore. Every message felt like a negotiation. If I said too little, it sounded cold. If I said too much, it would raise questions I couldn't answer. And questions were dangerous, not because of secrecy, but because of interpretation. My father didn't read between lines. He read into them. A short message meant distance. A delayed reply meant disrespect. Silence meant abandonment. So eventually, I stopped trying to calibrate it. I wrote less. Not because I didn't care, that's the part people always get wrong, but because caring became complicated. Every word I sent was filtered through who he thought I was. Every sentence risked becoming proof that I was irresponsible, unreliable, or already halfway gone. Once, weeks after I hadn't written at all, I finally sent a message longer than usual. 3 sentences. Neutral. Careful. He replied within minutes. When are you coming back? You can't disappear like this. You're acting like a child. I stared at the screen until it went dark. That was when I understood something uncomfortable. My absence was easier for him than my independence. As long as I was silent, he could tell himself whatever story he needed. That I'd gotten scared, that I'd quit, that I'd drifted off somewhere and lost control again. Silence allowed him to stay right. Contact would have forced him to update his narrative. So I let the silence stretch. Weeks passed, then months. My name stopped coming up in conversations I wasn't part of. Life in that house reorganized itself without me. I knew it instinctively, the way you know when a room has been rearranged even before you see it. I heard it through other people. Casual comments, indirect information. Your father says you don't talk to him anymore. He's worried, you know. He thinks you just vanished. Vanished. Not serving. Not working. Not building something. Just gone. There was something almost impressive about how cleanly he erased me. No conflict, no confrontation, just a quiet reclassification. Absent. And I realized something else, too. Something colder. He liked it that way. An absent daughter couldn't contradict him. An absent daughter couldn't say no. An absent daughter couldn't interfere. I didn't know yet what he would do with that assumption. I only felt the shift, like pressure building behind a wall. Meanwhile, my life continued in ways he would never recognize. I learned how to stay calm while being yelled at, how to listen without reacting, how to assess people quickly, who was posturing, who was dangerous, who was just loud. I learned that authority didn't always come with intelligence, and silence didn't always mean weakness. I became quieter, but not smaller, stronger, but not louder. And every time I thought about writing again, really writing, explaining everything, I stopped myself. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Some people don't lose you because you leave. They lose you because they never bothered to know who you were when you stayed. By the time my father fully convinced himself that I was effectively gone, I had already completed things he once said I never could. He just wasn't there to witness it. And soon, very soon, that absence would become a problem he could no longer ignore. The house was always his favorite argument. It didn't matter what the actual conversation was about. Money, my choices, my absence, my silence. It always circled back to the same structure of bricks and old wood, as if the walls themselves were evidence of his authority. I maintain it. I pay for it. I'm responsible for it. He said those sentences for years, long before I left. He said them when I was still there, still paying my part, still fixing things, still cleaning, still living like a ghost tenant in my own childhood home. What he didn't like to emphasize, what he usually skipped over quickly, was that the house was registered in both our names. Legally, officially, in ink. He knew that. I knew that. But legality only mattered when it served him. When I lived there, my share was technical. When I left, it became irrelevant. At least, that's how he framed it to people. I wasn't there, so how much right could I really have? Absence, in his mind, meant forfeiture. I wasn't around to contradict that logic. I wasn't around to remind him that shared ownership didn't expire just because he felt abandoned. And over time, he grew comfortable with the idea that the house was functionally his. He talked about repairs more often, about selling someday, about how difficult it was to manage everything alone, about how irresponsible it was to disappear and leave him with all this. All this meaning, control he didn't want to share. He told relatives that I had basically left for good. He told neighbors I stopped communicating. He told himself I wasn't coming back. And the more he repeated it, the more real it became to him. From a distance, I felt it before I knew it. Not through words, but through tension. Through that familiar pressure you feel when someone is making plans that quietly exclude you. I didn't know the details yet, but I sensed the direction. The house stopped being a place. It became a justification. If I was gone, then decisions could be made for me. If I was gone, then consent became unnecessary. If I was gone, then paperwork could replace conversation. He convinced himself that I had chosen absence. What he didn't consider was that absence can be temporary, but assumptions solidify fast. In my world, the house barely existed anymore. My days were measured in tasks, not rooms, in routes, not hallways, in responsibility that had nothing to do with property lines. But to him, the house became the stage where he rehearsed his sense of betrayal. He told people he felt abandoned. He told people he was worried. He told people he didn't know if I was even alive. And every time he said it, he sounded almost rehearsed, as if the narrative comforted him. It justified everything he was about to do. At the time, I still believed, naively, that shared ownership would protect me. That legality would slow him down. That basic decency would kick in before anything irreversible happened. I underestimated how powerful it is when someone decides you are no longer present. Because once you're declared gone in someone's mind, they stop asking questions. They start filing paperwork. And somewhere between his certainty and my silence, the house stopped being a home and turned into an excuse, one he would soon take to court, convinced that no one would be there to stop him. He was wrong. But at that moment, I didn't know it yet. I only felt the ground shifting, quietly, efficiently, beneath something I still thought was stable. I didn't hear about it from him. That's the part that still sticks in my throat when I think about it. Not the action itself, but the method. The clean separation. The way he removed me from the equation without ever checking whether I still existed in it. He went to court, not to ask anything, not to clarify, not to protect me. He filed a claim to have me declared legally absent. I found out later how calmly he did it, how practical, how convincing. He brought documents, utility bills, statements from neighbors, records showing that I hadn't lived there for a long time, that I didn't answer calls, that I cut off contact. He didn't lie outright. He curated. He framed my silence as disappearance, my service as irresponsibility, my absence as abandonment. And the worst part? It worked, at least at first. Because when someone sits across from a judge and says, "My daughter vanished. I don't know where she is. I'm worried," it sounds reasonable, sympathetic even, especially when the daughter isn't there to contradict him. He didn't call me before filing. He didn't write. He didn't try to reach out one last time, just in case. He had already decided the outcome. In his version of events, I was gone. Not temporarily, not situationally, but fundamentally. A person who had opted out of responsibility and therefore forfeited her right to participate in decisions. Declaring me legally absent wasn't just about the house. It was about authority. If I was absent, he could act for me. If I was absent, he didn't need my signature. If I was absent, my objections didn't exist. It was the final evolution of something he'd been practicing my whole life, deciding who I was without asking me. I learned about the filing by accident. A message forwarded through 3 people, a screenshot with my name highlighted, legal language that felt unreal, detached, almost abstract, like it was describing someone else. Claimant requests recognition of respondent as absent due to prolonged lack of contact. Respondent. That was me. Not daughter, not family, not person. Respondent. I remember staring at the screen and feeling something unexpected. Not panic, not betrayal, clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't him not knowing. This wasn't concern expressed poorly. This was a calculated move made with full confidence that I wouldn't show up to stop it. And that realization hurt, but it also burned something clean inside me. Because for the first time, his behavior was undeniable. No reinterpretation, no benefit of the doubt. No, he means well. You don't declare someone legally absent if you're hoping they'll come back. You do it when you're done waiting. The irony was almost painful. While he was telling a court that he didn't know where I was waking up every day under orders, schedules, accountability so strict that my location was always known to the minute. While he painted me as irresponsible, I was operating in a system where absence had consequences far more immediate than paperwork. While he prepared to erase me legally, I was very much present, trained, documented, registered, and protected in ways he couldn't imagine. He just didn't know it yet. And that was his biggest mistake. Because he assumed my silence meant weakness. He assumed distance meant disappearance. He assumed I wouldn't come back to face him. He made a decision behind my back, confident that I would never stand in front of him again, calm, composed, very much existing, and force him to explain why he had tried to erase his own daughter. The papers were filed. The process was moving. The court date was set. And for the first time since I left, the choice was no longer abstract. I could stay silent and let him win by default. Or I could show up. Not as the girl he thought he knew, but as the person he had never bothered to ask about. I found out about the hearing 2 days before it was scheduled. Not from my father, not from a lawyer, not from any official channel. 2 days. That's how much notice I had. That, on paper, I was about to stop existing. The message reached me through a chain of people who didn't even know the full story. Someone forwarded a screenshot. Someone else added a short explanation. Legal language stripped of emotion. Urgency hidden behind neutral formatting. Court hearing regarding recognition of a person as legally absent. My name underneath. I read it 3 times before it felt real. 2 days isn't enough time to panic properly. It's not enough time to process betrayal in stages or rehearse emotional speeches in your head. 2 days forces clarity. You either act or you accept the outcome. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel dramatic rage. What I felt was something colder and sharper. So this is how far he's willing to go. I brought the documents to my commander, not with a speech, not with emotion. I handed them over the way I handed over everything else. Factual, controlled, efficient. He read silently. Then he looked at me and said, "You understand you have the right to be present? Not you must. Not I order you. A choice." That mattered more than he probably realized. I nodded. He continued, calm and precise. "If you want to go, you'll go officially, properly, with representation. If you don't, that's also your decision." He paused, then added, "But understand this. Silence will be interpreted as confirmation." That sentence settled something inside me. I had spent months learning the value of silence, when it protected you, when it sharpened you, when it kept you alive. But this wasn't that kind of silence. This silence would erase me. I asked for leave. It was approved faster than I expected. Not because of pity, because of procedure, because my situation wasn't emotional, it was legal. That difference mattered. On the way back, I didn't rehearse confrontations. I didn't imagine yelling or accusations or dramatic reveals. I didn't plan revenge. I planned logistics, uniform or civilian clothes, arrival time, who would sit next to me, which documents mattered. I realized something unsettling on that trip. I wasn't afraid of seeing my father. I was curious. Curious how someone looks when their certainty is challenged. Curious how confidence behaves when confronted with reality. Curious whether he would recognize me at all. I arrived the night before the hearing, stayed somewhere neutral, didn't go to the house, didn't announce myself, didn't warn him, not out of cruelty, out of precision. He had chosen to act without informing me. I returned the favor. That night, lying awake, I finally felt something emotional break through the discipline and control. Not sadness, disappointment. Because even now, even facing court, A part of me had hoped there would be some explanation that made sense, some justification that didn't reduce everything to convenience and control. There wasn't. 2 days before the hearing, my existence was still a technicality to him. 2 days before the hearing, he still believed I wouldn't come. He was wrong. And the strange thing was, realizing that didn't make me angry. It made me calm. Because once you stop hoping someone will act differently, their actions lose the power to hurt you. They only define what you do next. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to show up, not to beg, not to accuse, not to explain myself, but to stand in a room where I had already been erased on paper and remind everyone, quietly and unmistakably, that I was still there, very present, and fully prepared to finish what he had assumed I never could. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to see the room before it filled with assumptions. Courtrooms have a particular smell: old paper, polished wood, quiet authority. They're designed to make people lower their voices before they even speak. I was already wearing my uniform, not as a statement, not as a provocation. It was simply what I had. I stood near the entrance for a moment, adjusting nothing, breathing evenly, letting my body remember how to be still in public spaces again. After months of controlled environments, civilian places felt oddly exposed. Too many eyes, too many interpretations. People looked at me, then looked again. Uniforms do that. They interrupt narratives. My father arrived 10 minutes later. He walked in confidently, already mid-conversation with his lawyer. He looked rested, certain, comfortable in the role he had rehearsed for weeks: the abandoned parent, the responsible owner, the man left to clean up someone else's mess. He didn't see me at first. I watched him take his seat, arrange his papers, lean back slightly like someone who expected this to be routine, a formality, a stamp on a decision he had already made. Then his lawyer stopped talking. I saw it happen in stages: confusion, recognition, disbelief. My father followed his gaze and froze. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so human. The exact second when a carefully constructed reality collapses. His face went pale, not angry, not offended, shocked, like someone seeing a ghost that wasn't supposed to exist. For a brief moment, I wondered if he would smile, if he would stand up, if he would say my name. He didn't. He just stared. I walked past him without a word and sat down beside my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a military prosecutor. That detail landed a few seconds later, and when it did, I saw something close to fear flicker across his face, not because of me, because of what my presence meant. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The room shifted into procedure. The case was called. My father's lawyer spoke first. Calm, measured. He repeated the same narrative my father had been practicing for months. Daughter disappeared. No contact. Concern. Responsibility. Necessity. I listened without reacting. It was strange, hearing myself described as an absence while sitting there in full view, like watching someone talk about the weather while standing in the rain. Then my lawyer stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He stated facts: that I was on active military service, that my location and status were documented, that declaring a person legally absent under these conditions was not only inaccurate, but misleading. My father shifted in his chair. The judge looked up. And for the first time since the hearing began, he looked directly at me. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, with attention. "Is the respondent present?" the judge asked. My lawyer answered, "Yes, Your Honor." There was a pause, not dramatic, just enough. My father's certainty didn't explode. It deflated, slowly, quietly. You could almost hear the air leaving it. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes forward, hands relaxed, posture steady. Months of training had taught me something invaluable: Stillness is unsettling to people who expect emotion. The judge turned back to my father. Did the claimant know that his daughter was on active military service? The question was simple. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't loud. But it cut straight through the story he had brought with him. My father opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. I saw him calculate. Lie or admit ignorance. Either option cost him something. I didn't know where she was, he said finally. That was the moment I understood everything. He hadn't tried to find out. He hadn't wanted to. Not knowing had been useful. Because knowing would have required him to stop pretending I was irresponsible, lost, or incapable. Knowing would have forced him to acknowledge that I had chosen something he couldn't control. The judge nodded slowly, writing something down. The room felt different now. The balance had shifted. The narrative was no longer his to manage. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was clarity. This wasn't about the house anymore. This was about identity. And in that courtroom, surrounded by paperwork meant to erase me, my existence had become undeniable. Not because I argued, not because I explained, but because I showed up. Exactly where he was sure I wouldn't. The judge didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed after the room went quiet again. He didn't react emotionally, didn't lecture, didn't express surprise. He simply adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents in front of him as if something didn't line up anymore. Because it didn't. Up until that moment, the case had been simple. A familiar pattern, a missing person, a concerned parent. Paperwork designed to move things along efficiently. Courts like efficiency. They like absence because it simplifies responsibility. Presence complicates everything. The judge lifted his head again. Did the claimant make any attempts to verify the respondent's status before filing this request? My father straightened slightly. I could see him trying to regain control of the situation, trying to reposition himself back into authority. He cleared his throat. I tried to contact her. She didn't respond. The judge nodded, as if acknowledging the statement, then asked calmly, Did you contact any official institutions? The military registry? Any state services that could confirm her whereabouts? My father hesitated. That hesitation stretched longer than he expected. No, he said. I assumed. The judge raised his hand gently, stopping the sentence before it could turn into justification. Assumptions are not verification, he said evenly. Then came the question, the one that changed everything. Did the claimant know that his daughter was on active military service at the time of filing this claim? It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse. But it stripped the situation down to its core. My father looked at the table, at his papers, at his hands. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. No, he said quietly. Not I didn't know. Not she didn't tell me. Just no. And in that single syllable, the entire case collapsed, because the court wasn't looking at an abandoned parent anymore. It was looking at a man who had chosen not to know. The judge wrote something down, slowly, deliberately. The court notes that the respondent is present, identifiable, and confirmed to be on active service at the time of the claim, he said. This contradicts the basis of the request. My father's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. Damage control, minimization, retreat. But it was too late. The narrative he had built relied on my invisibility, on my silence being interpreted as disappearance, on no one asking the wrong question. That question had now been asked and answered. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel relief in the way people describe it, like weight lifting off your chest or justice finally arriving. What I felt was something colder and more final. Recognition. Not of my service, not of my sacrifice, of my autonomy. In that moment, I understood that he hadn't lost the house. He had lost something else entirely. He had lost the right to define me. For years, he had spoken about me as if I were unfinished, temporary, unreliable, a problem waiting to resolve itself through failure. In one legal proceeding meant to erase me, that version of me collapsed under the simplest scrutiny. I was no longer an assumption. I was a fact. The judge dismissed the claim, formally, cleanly, without commentary. Paperwork shuffled, pens scratched, the room prepared to move on to the next case. My father sat frozen, staring straight ahead. He didn't look at me, not once. I think he was afraid of what he might see, because the daughter he thought had disappeared wasn't asking for forgiveness, wasn't explaining herself, wasn't begging to be understood. She had stood there calmly while his certainty unraveled. And when the judge stood and the room rose with him, I understood something that surprised even me. This wasn't the end of something painful. It was the end of something false. And I didn't need another word to be said to know that whatever came next, for him, for me, for the space between us, would never again be decided without my presence. The hearing ended the way most legal things do, quietly. No dramatic verdict. No raised voices, no emotional closure wrapped in formal language. Just a short statement, a dismissal. The sound of papers being gathered, chairs shifting, people already mentally moving on to whatever came next on their schedule. Justice, I learned that day, is rarely cinematic. People stood up. Conversations restarted in low tones. Someone laughed softly near the door, completely unrelated to my life, falling neatly back into legal existence. I remained seated for a few seconds longer than necessary, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to recalibrate. I had spent months functioning in systems where everything had a clear purpose, a clear command, a clear next step. Civilian spaces were messier, emotional debris everywhere, unspoken expectations lingering in the air. I stood. My lawyer said something brief and professional, a nod, a handshake. No congratulations, no sympathy, just acknowledgement. I appreciated that. My father stayed where he was. For a moment, I thought he might speak. Say my name. Ask something clumsy and late, like, why didn't you tell me, or you should have called, or you didn't have to do this. He didn't. He stared at the table as if it had betrayed him. I walked past him, not fast, not slow, just steady. I felt his presence the way you feel heat after stepping away from a fire, not burning anymore, but still noticeable. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to see his face to know what was happening behind me. Something had cracked. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, sharper, like the world had edges again. I took a breath and realized my hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I had expected some kind of delayed emotional collapse. Tears in a stairwell, anger on the street, a sudden rush of everything I'd been holding back. None of that came. What came instead was a strange, grounded calm. On the walk away from the courthouse, my thoughts didn't circle him. They didn't replay the hearing or imagine alternate outcomes. My mind did what it had learned to do over the past year: assess, conclude, move forward. I thought about the house. Not with longing, not with resentment, just practically. It existed. It was legally unresolved in the way it had always been. Shared ownership, shared history. No illusion of shared understanding anymore. I knew I wouldn't move back in, not because I had been rejected, because I had outgrown the space where my existence needed justification. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from him. One sentence: we need to talk. I stared at it for a long time. There was a time when those words would have sent me into a spiral, rehearsing responses, anticipating accusations, preparing to defend choices I shouldn't have had to explain. Now they felt late. I didn't reply right away, not as punishment, as clarity. Because talking implies a shared language, and we didn't have that anymore. We had facts. We had boundaries. We had a court record that made one thing unmistakably clear. I was not someone he could act for without consequence. That night, I packed again. Not in a rush, not emotionally. I folded my uniform carefully, checked my documents, prepared to return to service the way I had prepared for everything else. Deliberately. As I lay down to sleep, one thought surfaced, quiet but firm. He hadn't tried to sell the house because he needed the money. He had tried to sell it because it was the last place where he felt in control. And now, even there, he wasn't. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. What I felt was separation. Clean, necessary, overdue. Some people lose authority loudly in arguments and explosions and final confrontations. Others lose it quietly, in rooms where the truth is spoken without emotion, and the person they underestimated simply stands there, undeniable. I fell asleep, knowing that whatever conversation he wanted now would happen on terms he didn't set. And for the first time, that wasn't something I needed to explain to anyone. It was simply how things were now. I returned to service the next morning. No ceremony, no lingering. I handed in my documents, followed procedure, and stepped back into the rhythm that had already taught me how to stand upright, without applause. The world I re-entered didn't ask where I'd been the last few days. It didn't ask how court went. It didn't ask how I felt about my father. It asked one thing. Are you ready? I was. That surprised me less than it should have. People think moments like that, courtrooms, betrayals, quiet legal violence, permanently harden you. That they turn you bitter or closed or aggressive. Maybe they do for some. For me, they clarified something I'd spent most of my life misunderstanding. Strength isn't loud. Strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain. It doesn't chase validation. Strength shows up. For years, I thought endurance meant staying, taking it, absorbing disappointment and hoping someone would eventually notice the effort. I thought loyalty meant silence, and silence meant respect. I was wrong. Endurance sometimes means leaving. Loyalty sometimes means refusing to disappear. And silence only has power when you choose it, not when it's imposed on you. My father never apologized. I didn't expect him to. Some people don't know how to apologize without losing the version of themselves they've protected for decades. And honestly, I didn't need it. An apology wouldn't have returned the time, the trust, or the assumption of goodwill that had already expired. What mattered was that the system he tried to use against me failed. Not because I fought it loudly, but because I existed in it fully. I think that's the part that unsettled him the most. Not my uniform, not the lawyer, not the dismissal of his claim, but the realization that I no longer needed him to understand me. That I wasn't angry, wasn't pleading, wasn't trying to repair anything. I had moved past the stage where his approval defined my direction. And here's the thing no one really talks about after service, after humiliation, after attempted erasure. You don't come back the same. You come back calibrated. You learn how to assess people quickly, how to recognize control disguised as concern, how to spot narratives that benefit one person at the expense of another. And most importantly, you learn when to stop explaining yourself. If you're reading this because someone in your life tried to make you smaller after you served, emotionally, legally, socially, hear this clearly. Your absence does not belong to them. Your silence is not their permission. And your endurance is not an invitation to be erased. You don't have to scream to reclaim your place. Sometimes all it takes is standing exactly where they were sure you wouldn't be, calm, documented, undeniable, and letting the truth do the work for you. I didn't win something in court. I recovered something much more valuable. My name, my agency, my right to finish what I start without needing anyone's belief to do it. And that's something no one can ever file paperwork to take away again.